The Valor cut through the stars, silent and resolute, its massive hull gleaming like a titan in the darkness. The crew aboard, unaware of the storm that was about to erupt ahead. As the ship entered the uncharted sector of space, Commander Hayes stared at the view screen. His eyes narrowed as the ship's sensors began to register strange activity in the distance. His fingers hovered over the controls, unsure of what to make of the sudden spike in energy readings. The deep void ahead seemed calm, too calm for the unexplored reaches of space. Lieutenant Darius at the sensor station spoke up, his voice tight with tension. "Captain, we're picking up multiple ships ahead. They appear to be in some kind of formation, but there's something off about it." Hayes leaned forward, his brow furrowing. As he studied the data, the ships didn't match any known alien species in the archives. Their energy signatures were uncomfortably close together, as if they were preparing for something. Hayes ordered the ship to move forward cautiously, his eyes never leaving the screen. A sudden flash of light in the distance caught his attention. The ships ahead erupted into a violent burst of energy as two fleets collided in an explosion of light and sound. The screen flickered for a moment before stabilizing, revealing two massive alien fleets locked in battle. The Valor was now within their sight line, and both sides seemed to notice the human ship. In an instant, Hayes cursed under his breath. The battle between these alien factions seemed inevitable, and now they had an unexpected third party to deal with. Communication systems came to life with a burst of static followed by a commanding voice speaking in a harsh alien language. Hayes turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Maya. "Are you able to decipher the transmission?" The officer worked quickly, but the alien language was unlike anything they had encountered before. Even their best translation algorithms couldn't keep up with the complexity of the words. Finally, Maya looked up with a strained expression. "Captain, it's a warning. They're demanding we leave the area immediately, or we'll be destroyed." Before Hayes could respond, another voice came through, this one more grating and authoritative, the tone unmistakable. It was clear that one of the alien factions had taken notice of the Valor's presence and viewed it as a potential threat, not as a peaceful explorer, but as an enemy who would interfere in their war. The transmission was clear now. This message came with no room for negotiation. The Valor had to leave or face annihilation. Hayes felt his pulse quicken as he processed the situation. His eyes shifted to the view screen where two enormous fleets continued their battle. One fleet, a series of sleek and angular ships, the other more jagged and bulky in design. The two factions seemed to be locked in a centuries-old war, their struggle ongoing without respite, neither side showing any signs of mercy or compromise. And now the Valor stood in the middle of it all. He tapped his communicator and ordered the crew to prepare for evasive maneuvers. They would need to figure out a way to get out of this alive, but their options were limited. The Valor was a battleship, not a diplomatic envoy, and these alien races had made it clear they were not interested in peace. Hayes wasn't sure how they would make it out of this, but one thing was certain: the Valor was going to need every bit of its strength to survive the storm ahead. This should set the stage with a sense of mounting tension and uncertainty, drawing readers into the conflict and the unknown. Would you like me to continue or modify anything? The Valor lurched as its engines fired to life, a low rumble shaking the deck as Commander Hayes barked orders across the bridge. His fingers danced across the controls, readying the ship for whatever came next. The alien fleets ahead were locked in a deadly struggle, their weapons lighting up the black void with bright flashes of energy, each shot reverberating like thunder through the emptiness. But the Valor wasn't part of this war, yet still it stood at the center of it, all a strange third force caught between two factions with no clear allegiance. Captain Hayes studied the view screen carefully. The enemy ships seemed to be divided into two distinct groups, one sleek and fast, the other more imposing and brute-like. Neither group had yet acknowledged the human ship in any meaningful way, but Hayes knew that was about to change. The more time they spent in this space, the more likely it was that one of the alien factions would turn their guns on the Valor, no matter how much diplomacy they tried to inject into the situation. Lieutenant Darius was the first to speak up, his voice tense. "Captain, we're picking up a high-energy pulse coming from the larger fleet. It looks like they're powering up something big." Hayes turned sharply toward him. What kind of weapon? The sensor officer didn't hesitate. It appears to be some kind of long-range plasma cannon with a direct course set for us. Hayes' stomach dropped. The ship was still too close to the alien conflict to easily escape. If things escalated, they'd be caught in the crossfire with no chance to avoid. He turned to his weapons officer, Commander Jenkins. Prepare the weapons and shields. We may not get another chance to act. The crew moved quickly, their motions practiced as they set the ship's defenses into full gear. Hayes felt a chill crawl down his spine as he realized that the Valor had never been in this kind of situation before. Not like this, an unexpected battle in unknown territory, with no clear friends, no allies, just an alien war over resources that could destroy them if they were caught in the wrong crossfire. The plasma weapon from the alien fleet ahead flared to life in a blinding burst of light. It shot forward with incredible speed and power, but Hayes was ready for it as the ship's shields activated. A shimmering blue glow enveloped the Valor, absorbing the impact of the blast. With a force that rattled the ship's bones for a moment, it seemed as if the Valor would be sent careening out of control, but the ship held steady despite the force behind the hit. The shields held strong despite the aliens' overwhelming firepower. Darius stared in disbelief. Captain, their weapon, it's almost identical to our own long-range plasma cannons, but their output is unstable, like they're still fine-tuning the technology. Hayes gritted his teeth. The first strike had been just a test. They were seeing if the Valor was vulnerable, but the ship's technology had proven resilient. They wouldn't get a second chance for a probe. The Valor's response would come swift and decisive. Now the decision was simple. Hayes spoke in a voice that brooked no argument. Fire everything we have at that fleet. Let them know they picked the wrong fight. As soon as the order was given, Jenkins didn't hesitate, unleashing a volley of plasma shots. From the Valor's main weapons, the blast streaked across the void with deadly accuracy, slamming into the enemy ships ahead. The alien fleet shuddered under the assault, their ships taking the brunt of the hits. The force of the Valor's weaponry staggered them. The Warlord faction ships, barely able to maintain formation, the reaction was immediate and violent. The alien fleet scattered into a defensive posture, regrouping quickly, but the damage had been done. They had felt the strength of the human weaponry. Now, for the first time, they realized that this strange new ship wasn't just an observer, it was a force to be reckoned with. The communications officer, Maya, shouted out, Captain, we're receiving another transmission, this one much more urgent. The alien voice was laden with fear and frustration. Our fleets will destroy you if you don't leave now. Hayes' eyes narrowed as he stared at the screen, ready to face whatever came next, knowing full well that the Valor was no longer a passive player in this conflict. It was a catalyst that would change the fate of these alien factions forever. The Valor hung in the void, its engines humming steadily after the brutal exchange with the alien fleets. The air on the bridge was thick with tension, every crew member's eyes fixed on the screen as the scattered alien ships regrouped in the distance. Captain Hayes stood at the helm, his jaw clenched, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Valor had struck first, and now they were an undeniable force on the galactic stage. But what came next? The alien factions wouldn't just back off. They wouldn't forget that display of power. Lieutenant Darius kept his eyes on the sensor readings, his hands hovering over the console. Sir, the alien fleets are shifting their positions. It looks like they're reorganizing, but they're hesitant. They're not sure how to respond. Hayes nodded, his mind already racing through possible scenarios. They could attack again, but this time they'd be ready for it. The alien factions would be more cautious. The Valor had made its mark, but it was far from safe. The captain turned to his communications officer, Maya. Open a channel to both fleets. We need to communicate before this gets out of hand. Maya hesitated but quickly complied. Her fingers danced across the controls as she established the connection. Within moments, a harsh, guttural voice crackled over the comms. Human vessel, the voice hissed, you dare interfere in our war. You are not welcome here. Leave or face destruction. The words were sharp, filled with rage, but there was something more. Beneath the anger, there was a hint of uncertainty, of fear. The alien fleet had encountered the Valor's firepower and felt the weight of its strength. But they couldn't just back down. It wasn't in their nature. Hayes stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We're not here to fight. We came to explore, to establish contact. But if you continue to threaten us, we'll defend ourselves." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. The alien voice on the other end muttered something in its harsh language. Then the transmission abruptly cut off. The Valor's crew exchanged uneasy glances. Hayes turned to Maya. "What just happened?" Maya shook her head. "I couldn't decipher the last part of their transmission, Captain. It sounded like they were talking to each other. It wasn't directed at us." Hayes frowned. "They're communicating among themselves. This isn't just about us. These two factions are at odds, and we've stumbled right into their conflict." Suddenly, a new voice came through the comms, this one far less hostile. The tone was sharp but laced with curiosity. "Human vessel, this is Commanding Officer Jarek of the Elistar Fleet. I demand to speak with your captain." Hayes stepped up to the comm station. "This is Captain Marcus Hayes of the Valor. I'm listening." Jarek's voice crackled over the line, but there was an undertone of respect. "We have been watching you. Your weapons, your strength. We are intrigued. You are unlike any species we have encountered. Tell us, human, do you intend to ally with the Destralians, or will you stand against them?" Hayes's brow furrowed. The question was loaded, and the implication was clear. The Elistar fleet saw the Valor as a possible ally. But why? What did they want from humanity? The Destralians, on the other hand, had made their intent clear. They wanted nothing to do with peace. Their war was their priority. "We came here for peace," Hayes replied carefully. "But if you want an alliance, you'll have to explain your reasons. We're not just going to join a war we don't understand." There was a brief pause, and then Jarek spoke again, this time with more urgency. "Understand this, Captain. The Destralians have been our enemies for centuries. Their power is vast, their hunger for conquest never-ending. If you are truly human, you must understand the need for strength. You can either stand with us and secure your place in this galaxy, or you can stand alone." The words hung in the air like a challenge, an ultimatum. The Valor's crew exchanged uncertain looks. Hayes's mind raced, weighing his options. They had no way of knowing who was telling the truth. The Destralians and the Elistar might both be dangerous, but they couldn't afford to pick a side without more information. "Tell me more about the Destralians," Hayes said, his voice steady, "and we'll decide what happens next." Another long silence followed before Jarek's voice responded, filled with something akin to respect, or maybe just calculation. "Very well, Captain. Prepare yourself. What you will hear will change everything you think you know about this galaxy." The Valor hovered in silence, its crew on edge as the transmissions from the Elistar fleet continued to crackle in the background. Hayes leaned forward in his command chair, his fingers drumming anxiously against the armrest. The alien factions had been at a standstill ever since the Valor had unleashed its firepower. The Elistar fleet had offered a glimpse of potential alliance, but the Destralians had remained quiet, their ships ominously still in the distance. What they would do next was anyone's guess, but Hayes could feel the weight of the decision he was about to make. Lieutenant Maya broke the silence. "Captain, the Destralians are moving. They're shifting into an offensive formation. It looks like they're preparing to strike." Hayes cursed under his breath. "Damn it. They're not wasting any time." Darius turned from his console, his expression tense. "The Elistar fleet is reacting. They're powering up their weapons, Captain. It looks like they're going to engage." "Not yet," Hayes said quickly. "We're not ready to pick sides. Hold off on responding until we have more information." But the command was almost futile. In that moment, the Valor wasn't just a neutral observer. It was a focal point of the conflict that neither alien faction had expected to involve humanity. And now, as the situation deteriorated, it was clear that they were being pulled into the heart of it. The communications panel flared to life, a frantic voice cutting through the static. "Human vessel, you must act now. The Australians are about to attack. We need your firepower." It was Jarek, his voice almost pleading. Hayes knew that the Illustar were desperate. The Valor's weapons had already proven themselves far superior to anything the Illustar had seen. If they could win humanity's favor, they might just have a chance to turn the tide. The screen shifted to show a view of the battle ahead. The Australian fleet had closed the distance between them and the Illustar ships, their weapons glowing menacingly as they prepared to strike. Hayes could see the flicker of shields coming online, but the Illustar ships were no match for the overwhelming firepower of the Australians. "Captain Jenkins, the weapons officer, said, his voice steady but with an edge of concern. "We could end this right now. One shot. We could cripple their fleet before they even get close." Hayes stared at the screen, his mind racing. The Valor had the power to end this battle in an instant, but what would it cost? If they sided with the Illustar, they risked creating an enemy of the Australians. If they refused, they would let an innocent faction be wiped out in front of them. A long silence followed. The decision weighed heavily on Hayes, but there was no time left. The Australians were already firing. "Now," Hayes barked, his voice full of authority. Jenkins didn't hesitate. The Valor's weapons systems came to life with a deafening roar, unleashing a torrent of plasma fire at the approaching Australian ships. The blasts collided with their targets with brutal force, sending shockwaves through the enemy fleet. In seconds, the first wave of Australian ships was torn apart, their shields collapsing under the force of the Valor's weaponry. The remaining ships faltered, unsure of how to respond to this new threat. But it wasn't over. As the Australians reeled from the assault, the Illustar fleet moved in, their weapons targeting the damaged ships. With the Valor's firepower, they had gained the upper hand. At least for now. The tide of the battle had shifted, and the Australians were on the defensive. Hayes watched as the Valor's firepower decimated the last of the Australian ships in the immediate vicinity. The Illustar fleet, bolstered by humanity's unexpected intervention, was gaining ground. But Hayes knew this victory was temporary. The Australians would regroup. They wouldn't let a defeat like this stand without retaliation. As the battlefield began to calm, Hayes's voice cut through the radio, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Jarek, this isn't over. The Australians won't forget this. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." There was a pause before Jarek's voice came back through the comms, a mix of gratitude and caution. "You have my thanks, Captain. The Australians will not forget this, but neither will we. You've proven your strength. You've shown us what humans are capable of." Hayes's eyes narrowed as he looked out at the wreckage of the Australian fleet, the damage to both sides unmistakable. "This isn't about strength," Hayes said quietly, more to himself than to Jarek. "This is about survival." And the battle, it seemed, was far from over. The Valor hovered in the aftermath of the battle, its systems humming as the last flickers of energy dissipated from the wreckage of the Australian fleet. The battlefield was littered with debris, destroyed ships, floating fragments, and the remnants of a war that had raged for far too long. Captain Hayes stood at the helm, his fingers resting lightly on the armrest of his chair. The silence was deafening. The crew was tense, their eyes scanning the view screen, knowing that the Australians wouldn't let this insult go unanswered. Lieutenant Maya glanced over her shoulder, her expression tight. "Captain, we're picking up multiple signatures from the Australian fleet. They're regrouping, but this time, they're deploying reinforcements, a lot of them." Hayes didn't flinch. "Of course they are. They're not going to let a blow like that slide." He turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel to Jarek. Let's see if the Illustar are ready to finish this." Maya's fingers flew across the controls, and a moment later, the screen flickered to life, revealing Jarek's face, still cold but now tinged with the slightest hint of respect. The Illustar fleet had taken advantage of the chaos to move into a stronger position, but they were no more prepared for the Australians' full strength than they had been before the Valor's intervention. They were now allies by necessity, but Jarek had made it clear earlier that he would take humanity's strength as an asset, not a partner. "We've bought ourselves some time, Jarek," Hayes said, his voice steady. "But you and I both know the Destralians won't just walk away. What's your plan?" Jarek's voice came back, its usual harsh edge softened by a layer of urgency. "The reinforcements we've detected are overwhelming. We'll hold our ground for now, but if the Destralians push hard enough, we'll be overrun. We need your firepower again, Captain. Your ship is unmatched. We need to hit them while they're still disorganized." Hayes didn't hesitate. "We're ready, but we're not just going to blast them and leave. If we're going to commit, we need to end this permanently." The crew on the bridge was silent, their eyes darting to one another as the weight of Hayes' words sank in. They all knew what he was suggesting. The Valor had the power to obliterate entire fleets, but the cost of using that power fully would be immense. The decision they faced wasn't just tactical, it was moral. Jenkins, the weapons officer, broke the silence. "Captain, the Valor's main weapons are fully charged. If we fire everything we have at once, we can destroy their reinforcements before they even have a chance to organize." Hayes felt a twinge of hesitation. This wasn't just a matter of fighting back anymore. It was the potential to reshape the entire conflict. One shot could cripple the Destralian war effort entirely. But at what cost? The Valor had already proven its strength, but unleashing all its might would send a message, not just to the Destralians, but to the Alistar as well. "We do it now," Hayes said finally, his voice resolute. "Let's make sure they understand that humanity is not to be underestimated." The command was immediate. The crew moved with practiced precision as Jenkins powered up the ship's weapon systems, each component of the Valor's arsenal coming online with a low, rumbling hum. The tension on the bridge was palpable, the air heavy with anticipation. They were about to unleash something that would shake the very foundations of this war. Hayes looked out at the screen, where the Destralian fleet was now fully visible. Dozens of massive ships, each brimming with firepower, but none of them had any idea what was coming. "Fire!" Hayes shouted. A split second later, the Valor unleashed its full arsenal. Plasma bolts streaked across the void, each one a harbinger of devastation. The first wave of shots hit the Destralian ships with surgical precision, cutting through shields and tearing apart hulls. But that was only the beginning. The Valor didn't stop. The weapons kept firing, cannons, railguns, and energy bursts, all converging on the enemy fleet. The shockwave of energy from the barrage was so intense that it sent ripples through space itself, distorting the light and warping the stars. The Destralian fleet didn't have time to react. Within moments, entire ships were disintegrated, their remains scattered across the battlefield like forgotten debris. The reinforcements, once a daunting presence, were now little more than ash and wreckage, leaving the remaining Destralian ships scattered and broken. Silence fell again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. The Alistar fleet, watching from a distance, remained still, no doubt calculating the implications of humanity's power. The Destralian warlord faction, though, had no words. They were in shock, lost, scattered and reeling from the sudden and overwhelming force that had obliterated their reinforcements in an instant. Hayes turned to the crew, his face grim. "We've done our part, but don't think for a second that this is over. The Destralians will regroup. And when they do, they won't just be after us. They'll come for the entire galaxy." His words echoed across the bridge as the crew began to realize the truth of their situation. Humanity had proven its strength, but that strength had made them a target. The battle for survival had only just begun. The Valor drifted in the aftermath of their decisive strike. The once proud Destralian fleet lay in ruin, scattered across the void in a sea of wreckage and shattered hulls. The ship's crew remained silent, their gazes fixed on the monitors, watching the remnants of the battle unfold in slow motion. The impact of their attack reverberated throughout the system, a singular moment of power that would echo across the galaxy. The silence on the bridge was both triumphant and heavy, as if the Valor had just crossed a line they could never uncross. Captain Hayes stood, staring out at the distant wreckage. There was a certain finality to the scene, but also a gnawing sense of uncertainty that lingered in the pit of his stomach. Yes, they had won this skirmish. But the Australians were not a defeated enemy. Hayes knew that this victory had made humanity a beacon in the eyes of the galaxy, one that could attract either allies or predators. Lieutenant Darius's voice broke through the tension. "Captain, the Star fleet is moving forward. They're taking advantage of the chaos, but they're hesitant. They don't want to overstep. Tell them to hold position." Hayes replied without turning. "We'll have to make our next move carefully." "Yes, Captain," Darius acknowledged, though he hesitated for a moment before adding, "Captain, do you think we made the right choice?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air like a weight he couldn't ignore. There had been no easy answers, no simple victories. They had struck a blow for survival, yes, but in doing so, they had changed the very nature of the conflict and humanity's place within it. The Valor had destroyed a fleet, but with that power came the responsibility to navigate what came next. "Right or wrong, Darius, we've made our choice," Hayes finally said. "Now we have to live with it." The moment was interrupted by Maya's voice, her tone urgent. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's from the Australians. They're requesting a ceasefire." Hayes turned, startled. "A ceasefire? After all this?" "Yes, sir," Maya confirmed, her fingers flying over the controls. "The message is clear. They want to discuss terms. They're willing to negotiate." The notion was surreal. After everything, the destruction, the lives lost, the sheer devastation of the battle, the Australians were asking for peace. But Hayes knew it wasn't that simple. They were in no position to simply lay down their arms. They were regrouping, preparing for what would surely be their retaliation. But this request for a ceasefire, it could mean something deeper. The question was whether they were offering negotiation as a means to avoid extinction, or if they were simply regrouping, hoping for another opportunity to strike. Hayes moved to the communication station, his eyes hard. "Put them through. Let's see what they have to say." The screen flickered, and soon the face of a Australian commander appeared. The alien's appearance was angular and sharp, their eyes glowing with an intense, almost otherworldly malice, but there was an unmistakable weariness to the way they held themselves. The Australians had been dealt a devastating blow, and now, in the wake of that, they were offering a truce. Human. The Australian's voice was harsh, but not without a trace of respect. "We acknowledge the power of your ship and your weaponry. The destruction you've wrought has shown us your strength. We are not fools. We ask for a ceasefire so that we may negotiate terms, not because we are afraid of your power, but because we now know that you are a force to be reckoned with." The words were sharp, filled with grudging respect, but they did not hide the fact that the Australians were still calculating, still weighing their options. There was no real sign of remorse, no apology for the war that had been waged. This was just a tactical retreat, a bid for survival, and Hayes knew that. Still, there was something unsettling about the tone of the transmission. The Australians weren't offering surrender. They were offering a way forward on their terms. Hayes took a breath. "You want peace, but only on your terms. That's not how this works. If you want to talk, then you'll need to give us something real. No more games. No more threats." The Australian commander's eyes narrowed. "You misunderstand, human. We are not here to beg for mercy. We are here to ensure that the future of this galaxy does not belong to one race alone. You have the power. We have the will. Together, we can carve out a future that none of us can control." Hayes felt the weight of the words as they hung in the air. This was no longer just a battle for survival. The stakes had been raised. The Australians were offering something more, a dangerous proposal for a new order. But could they trust them? Could anyone trust a faction that had caused so much destruction? Before Hayes could respond, the Destralian's transmission abruptly cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jenkins spoke up first. "Captain, they've cut communications." Hayes's brow furrowed. The Destralians had been calculating, but this sudden break in communication only raised more questions. The Valor had fought to survive, but now, faced with a galaxy that was uncertain, they were being thrust into a far larger game, one they weren't prepared for. "The real fight is just beginning," Hayes muttered to himself, his gaze drifting back to the stars outside the viewport. The Valor hung in space, its engines idle, as the aftermath of the battle settled around them. Captain Hayes sat in his chair, his eyes locked on the view screen, which now displayed the debris of the Destralian fleet scattered across the system. The harsh, broken remnants of their ships drifted aimlessly, a haunting reminder of the cost of their aggression. Yet, despite the victory, Hayes knew that peace was still an uncertain horizon, one that seemed farther away with each passing moment. The Illustar fleet, which had been quiet since the ceasefire request, began to move forward again, but at a more cautious pace. They had tasted victory, yes, but their war was far from over, and their new human allies had just thrown the balance of power into chaos. The stakes had escalated beyond anything Hayes could have predicted. "Captain," Lieutenant Darius's voice broke the silence on the bridge. "We're picking up strange readings. A ship off in the distance. It's different from anything we've encountered. It's not a lister. It's not Destralian either. We think it's a scout ship, but it's hard to get an exact lock." Hayes's brow furrowed. The last thing they needed was another unknown faction appearing at this juncture, especially one that had been hiding in the shadows. "What kind of ship is it, Darius? Can you identify it?" Darius's fingers danced across the console, his eyes narrowing. "It's unlike any vessel we've encountered, Captain. We can't get an exact read on its design, but it's moving cautiously, almost as if it's trying to avoid detection." The captain exchanged a look with Commander Jenkins, who was watching the sensor readings closely. "Should we engage it?" "No," Hayes said immediately, his voice calm but firm. "We don't know who they are, or what they want. Keep tracking it, but no aggressive moves. Let's see if we can establish contact first." A moment passed before Maya, the communications officer, spoke up. "Captain, I'm trying to hail the ship now. They're not responding to our standard channels. But there's something odd. It seems like they're emitting a signal, though it's encrypted." "Decrypt it," Hayes ordered. Maya's fingers flew across her station. For several tense seconds, the only sound was the soft hum of the Valor systems. Then, finally, she spoke. "I've got it. I'm opening the transmission." The screen flickered, and a new face appeared, a figure cloaked in shadow, their features hidden by a dark hood. The alien's voice, though mechanical and distorted, carried a weight of authority. "Human vessel," the voice said coldly, "your presence in this sector has not gone unnoticed. You've altered the balance of power, and now you will answer for it." Hayes stood tall, his expression unwavering. "We're not looking for trouble. We're just trying to survive and figure out what this conflict is all about. Who are you?" The figure paused, and for a moment, Hayes thought they wouldn't respond. Then the voice came again, softer this time, as if in contemplation. "You're asking questions that have no easy answers, human," the figure said. "We are neither ally nor enemy, but a force in this galaxy that seeks to preserve the fragile balance. You've made your first move, one that will have consequences, and now you must decide. Will you embrace this power, or will you let it consume you?" The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Maya tried to reestablish the link, but the signal was already gone. Hayes turned slowly toward the crew, his mind racing. "Did anyone catch that?" he muttered. "Yeah," Darius said, his voice tight with tension. "But I don't think anyone has any idea what just happened." That didn't sound like a simple warning. It sounded like a threat, and a cryptic one at that. Commander Jenkins, ever the pragmatist, spoke up. The Destralians and Illustar both underestimated us because they didn't know what we were capable of. But whoever this was, they already know exactly what we've done. And it seems like they're not impressed by what we've accomplished. Hayes rubbed his chin thoughtfully. No, they're not impressed. They're warning us that there are bigger forces at play, forces that won't just let us waltz in and take over. Whoever that was, they're more powerful than either the Illustar or the Destralians. And they're watching us, waiting. The words hung in the air like a thick fog. Humanity had made its mark, but it was clear that this was only the beginning. Whatever this new faction was, they were not going to stand by as humanity carved out its place in the galaxy. We need answers, Hayes said, more to himself than anyone else. We need to find out who they are, what they want, and why they're so interested in us. Agreed, Jenkins replied. But we need to be careful. Whoever they are, they're not giving us any friendly gestures. The quiet tension of the bridge was broken by Maya's voice again, urgent. Captain, the Illustar are sending a message. They want a meeting. They've detected the unknown ship too, and believe it's a third faction, one that has been watching the conflict between the Destralians and them for some time. Hayes straightened, his mind already racing. Set up the meeting. We need allies, and if the Illustar know more about this faction, we need to hear it. As the crew moved quickly to prepare, Hayes looked out at the stars once more. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Humanity had just stepped into a much larger game, one with players far beyond their understanding. The Valor remained suspended in space, its systems humming with a quiet urgency. The bridge crew was on edge, each member working with the sharpness born of recent battles, their minds still processing the cryptic warning they had just received. The unknown faction, one they had never encountered before, had made it clear. Humanity's actions had not gone unnoticed. The future was no longer just about surviving this conflict with the Destralians and the Illustar. The entire galaxy was now aware of humanity's strength, and that strength had drawn the attention of something far larger and far more dangerous. Captain Hayes stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The Illustar fleet was approaching, their ships forming up in a cautious but deliberate formation. They had agreed to meet with humanity to discuss the situation, and more importantly, to share what they knew about the mysterious third faction. But Hayes wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting. Would they view humanity as a powerful ally? Or was their interest merely tactical? They had already shown that they were willing to manipulate and use humanity to further their own ends. Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much more dangerous than they realized. Captain, Maya said, breaking the silence, the Illustar are hailing us. They're ready for the meeting. Hayes nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his chest. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him as he moved toward the communications station. As he gave the signal to connect, the screen flickered and came to life. Jarek appeared, his face serious but with the faintest trace of respect. Captain Hayes, Jarek began, his voice steady but laced with a hint of uncertainty. Thank you for your timely assistance. Your actions have changed the course of this conflict, and we have much to discuss. We are ready to engage in dialogue, but know this, our survival depends on the decisions we make from here on out. I understand, Hayes replied, his tone firm, but we need more than just your thanks. You said we have a common enemy. I assume this third faction you've mentioned is that enemy. Jarek's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a shadow of something darker passed over his face. Yes, Captain, they are. But we don't understand them fully. They are ancient, far more powerful than any of us realize. Their influence spans across the galaxy, but they remain hidden in the shadows, operating behind the scenes, manipulating the tides of war for reasons unknown. Hayes absorbed this information, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just a war for territory or resources. There were forces at play here that even the Elistar feared. "So, what do you suggest we do?" he asked, his voice low but resolute. "If they're watching us, and they have that kind of power, we need to know how to deal with them." Jarek hesitated, as though weighing his words carefully. "We don't have all the answers, Captain. But we know that they are watching you. Your ship, your power, it is unlike anything we've seen before. And it is because of this that we believe you may be the key to ending this war, to stopping them. You have the strength to fight back. But there is a price. Always a price," Hayes muttered, crossing his arms. He'd learned the hard way that nothing in this galaxy came without consequences. Jarek continued, his expression hardening. "The Elistar are not a unified force. We may stand with you now, but that could change. The truth is, there are factions within our own people who want to use your power for their own ends. They do not care about peace. They only care about domination. If you help us, you must be prepared to choose a side. And it won't always be the one you expect." The captain felt a chill at the words. His crew had fought hard for their survival, but now it was clear they were entangled in something far greater than a mere battle between two alien factions. This was a war for the very soul of the galaxy itself. A voice came from behind him, breaking the heavy silence. It was Jenkins, the weapons officer, his face filled with a grim understanding. "Captain, if we side with the Elistar, there's no going back. But if we don't, we're on our own," Hayes finished for him, his voice unwavering. "The Destralians will never forget what we did. And now we have this third faction watching us, waiting for our next move." Jarek's voice cut through again, urgent. "Captain, we have to act now. You are the key to the balance of power, but we need you to make a choice. Stand with us, and we can take down the Destralians and the unseen enemy that looms over us all. But stand alone, and you risk everything. Your people, your fleet, your future. We cannot afford to wait any longer." The weight of the moment crashed down on Hayes, and he realized what was at stake. His crew, his people, the future of humanity. It all hung in the balance. This wasn't just about fighting for survival anymore. This was about choosing who humanity would become in the galaxy, a power that could either destroy or reshape the fate of all life among the stars. He looked out at the view screen, the stars stretching endlessly into the void. The decision was his, and the path ahead, uncertain and fraught with danger, was one that would forever alter the course of humanity's destiny. With a steady breath, Captain Hayes finally spoke. "Jarek," he said, his voice cold but determined, "we'll fight with you. But make no mistake, I'm not doing this to follow anyone's orders. I'm doing this because it's the only way we survive. We'll play your game, but we'll do it on our own terms." Jarek nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "Then, Captain Hayes, welcome to the war." And as the transmission ended, the crew of the Veiler prepared for what was to come. They had made their choice. The fight was far from over, and they would face the unknown, no matter the cost.